Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty fundamental, actually, how we form our beliefs, especially now in this age of endless online information.
Hmm.
You've probably seen it, maybe even experienced it, this idea of rabbit hole metaphysics, people developing these really personalized, sometimes quite unique worldviews, often driven by what they find online.
Right. It goes beyond just casual interest. It becomes
Yeah.
a core framework for understanding everything.
Exactly. And guiding us through this whole complex area is John Vervaeke. He is an award-winning professor, works in cognitive science, Buddhist psychology. Really fascinating perspective.
And what's really compelling about his work, I think, is this tension he identifies right at the heart of modern thought. He looks at physicalism, this sort of mainstream idea that everything is ultimately physical matter.
Yeah, the dominant view, basically.
Right. And he argues that this view, unintentionally, leads to what he calls a meaning crisis.
A meaning crisis. How
Yeah.
so?
Well, think about it. If your worldview explains everything in purely material terms, where do you fit in? You, the person making meaning, seeking understanding. Where's your place in that picture? It can leave you feeling disconnected, alienated.
Okay, I see. So the explanation explains everything except the explainer.
That's a good way to put it. So Vervaeke flips the usual approach. Instead of starting with physics to understand consciousness, he says, maybe we should start with cognition, how we think, how we perceive.
Interesting. So how we think actually shapes our reality, even our scientific models.
Precisely. His point is that all our models, physics included, are built on assumptions. Assumptions made by the human mind.
Uh-huh.
And here's the kicker. You can't fully validate those foundational assumptions using only the systems built on them.
Right, like you can't prove the rules of logic using only logical deductions within that same system. You need something more fundamental.
Exactly.
Hmm.
He uses this analogy of predicate calculus versus modal logic. You can compute away within predicate calculus forever, but you'll never generate the principles of modal logic from inside it. You have to step outside, add new axioms, new functions.
So understanding the world requires these leaps, these frameworks that our current knowledge systems alone can't generate or justify from within.
That's the idea. And throughout history, we've used grand narratives, mythologies, to provide these frameworks. Think animism, Zoroastrianism, the Abrahamic
Or
faith.
give people a place, a purpose, a story.
Yes. But Vervaeke makes this really provocative claim. He says the dominant, often unspoken myth of our time isn't one of those grand narratives. It's the myth of the zombie.
The zombie. Seriously, how does that work?
Well, think about the characteristics he and his co-authors highlight. Zombies aren't supernatural, not really. They're us decayed.
Yeah.
Very naturalistic, almost scientific in a grim way.
Okay.
They hunger for brains, the organ we associate with thinking, with meaning-making. It's like a hunger for the very thing they've lost.
Huh. That's unsettling.
And their consumption is insatiable. They move in hordes, but have no real community, no history, no culture, just aimless drifting and consuming.
Wow. So the idea is that our fascination with zombie apocalypses, it reflects something about us.
It might reflect a cultural anxiety, yeah. A culture maybe denying transcendence, focusing purely on material well-being, survival, but finding no real satisfaction, no deeper meaning in it. A world full of hungry ghosts, in a way.
That's a lot to take in. It definitely puts those movies in a different light.
It does. And it leads directly to the question, okay, if we're in this meaning crisis, how do we get out?
Right. What are the options?
Vervaeke acknowledges things people are already turning to: meditation, mindfulness, even mystical experiences. These can be powerful.
But there's a catch, I'm guessing.
There's a crucial caveat. He argues that these practices need to be embedded in a worldview that actually makes sense of them, that legitimizes them.
Hmm.
An ecology of practices, he calls it, needs a homing worldview.
So just meditating functionally, like as a stress reduction technique, detached from, say, Buddhist philosophy, that might not be enough.
It might even exacerbate the problem, potentially. If you're just using it functionally within the same materialistic, non-transcendent mindset that caused the crisis,
Yeah.
you're not really changing the underlying issue. You're still stuck in that framework.
Okay, so practices need a context, a worldview that supports them. What does he propose instead?
He talks about cultivating a thin description oriented towards what he calls strong transcendence.
Thin description, strong transcendence. Can you unpack that?
Sure. Strong transcendence refers to a reality or principle that's genuinely beyond the purely material, something that engagement with can lead to real transformation, growth, maturation.
Okay, something more than just, say, appreciating nature or art, which might be weak transcendence.
Exactly. And the thin description part is key. It contrasts with a thick description, which would be a detailed dogma or religious system explaining exactly what that transcendence is. Materialism, for instance, is a very thick description of non-transcendence.
So a thin description leaves it more open, less defined.
Yes, it's oriented towards this transformative potential without nailing it down with specific doctrines. It provides a direction, a possibility, without the baggage of a full-blown religious system.
And this connects to his idea of recovering the vertical dimension, right?
Precisely. It's about realizing we aren't just beings moving horizontally through history and politics. There's also this vertical axis and ontological participation. It echoes Plato, the Neoplatonists. This idea of levels of reality and the possibility of becoming, as they might say, more at one with the one.
So moving beyond just the historical self to a deeper ontological self.
That's the direction.
Okay, this is deep stuff. How did we even get to this point, this meaning crisis? What's the history here?
Vervaeke traces it back quite a way. He uses anthropologist Clifford Geertz's idea of a worldview, this linked system of epistemology, how we know things, and ontology, how we think the world is.
It's like the underlying grammar of our culture, shaping how we make sense of everything.
Exactly, a cultural cognitive grammar. And a key turning point he identifies is the Axial Age, around 2,500 years ago.
The time of Buddha, Confucius, Socrates.
Right. It was a period of immense upheaval, Bronze Age empires collapsing. This led to widespread suffering, but also innovation. New psychotechnologies emerged, things like alphabetic literacy, coinage, advanced numeracy.
How did those technologies change things?
They fostered what Vervaeke calls second-order thinking, or metacognition, thinking about thinking.
Becoming aware of our own thought processes.
Yes, and with that came a growing awareness of humanity's role in causing suffering, and this unsettling sense that maybe our fundamental way of seeing the world was flawed, illusory, fallen, sinful, out of harmony. Different traditions framed it differently.
And this led to the two worlds idea.
It seems so. The idea emerged that there's this ordinary, perhaps less real, lower world we inhabit, and a higher, more real world or state we need to ascend towards for true fulfillment or salvation.
Okay, so that framework became quite dominant.
Very. But Vervaeke points out interesting variations. Ancient Greece, especially with Plato, really emphasized the vertical dimension, these hierarchical levels of reality, forms, the good.
The ascent.
Right. Whereas the Hebrew tradition tended to emphasize the horizontal dimension history as the arena of God's action, moving through time towards a future fulfillment.
Two different axes of meaning.
And Christianity, he argues, performed a powerful synthesis. It integrated both. You have the historical narrative, the story moving through time, horizontal.
Yeah.
Also the Neoplatonic ideas of ascension, union with God, vertical. It provided a very comprehensive map, rules, domological, story narrative, and a path for transformation, normative.
That sounds like a very stable, integrated worldview. So what happened? How did it fall apart?
Well, according to Vervaeke, things started to fray in the late Middle Ages, even before the Reformation or the Enlightenment proper. Several factors were at play.
Like what?
Changes in reading practices, texts becoming more available even before the printing press. This spread ideas more widely. But also a shift in what counted as knowing.
How so?
He talks about propositional tyranny, the idea that true knowing is primarily about believing true statements or propositions. This marginalized other forms of knowing that were important in antiquity.
You mentioned those earlier.
Right. Noesis, intuitive insight, technique, skilled know-how, aesthesis, sensory perception, gnosis, participatory transformative knowledge. These got sidelined in favor of just propositional belief.
So knowing became flattened, reduced to just facts or statements.
In a way, yes. And alongside this, you had the rise of nominalism, the philosophical idea that universal concepts are just names. They don't correspond to any real essence out there.
How did that contribute?
It fostered a sense of detachment, like we're just observers naming things from a distance, rather than participants in a meaningful reality. This led to a feeling of disconnection.
And the two worlds.
That mythology started to harden, to ossify. It became a rigid split. A natural world studied by reason and science, and a supernatural world accessible only by faith and faith itself started being defined increasingly as believing things without evidence or even against it.
So the two worlds became almost entirely separate domains.
Exactly. And this separation had consequences. The supernatural world started to seem increasingly unbelievable, absurd even, to the rational mind. But losing that connection also started to drain the natural world of its inherent value, its sacredness. Nietzsche diagnosed this powerfully later on.
Okay, I can see how these pieces fit together, leading towards a more fragmented view.
And then comes Descartes. His famous mind-body dualism created these radical splits. Mind versus body, me versus you, other mind's problem, self versus world.
The foundations of modern skepticism.
Right. Solipsism looms, the sense that maybe only my own mind is real. And this whole process erodes what Peter Berger's called the sacred canopy, that shared set of beliefs that give life meaning and order.
And this is where the modern secular state and the scientific worldview really take shape.
Yes, largely within that Cartesian framework. And that, for Vervaeke, is the culmination of the meaning crisis fully blooms. We have a worldview brilliant at explaining the how of the universe, but it struggles to account for the why, for the meaning maker, for our sense of belonging, our drive for truth. Radical alienation is the result.
Wow, that's quite a historical sweep. So after Descartes, philosophy continued to grapple with this.
Definitely. Thinkers like Hume, with his empiricism, really pushed the limits of what reason could claim to know about ultimate reality.
And then
Kant's
critique.
Exactly. Kant, building on Hume, argued that the very structure of our minds shapes our experience so profoundly that we can never know things as they are in themselves. We can't build a reliable metaphysics, basically. The mind's categories get in the way.
So philosophy itself started pointing out the limitations of reason to grasp ultimate reality.
In a major way. Fast forward to the 20th century, and you see attempts to break free from the whole Cartesian legacy. Wittgenstein, Heidegger, they tried to dissolve the mind-body problem, to rethink subjectivity. The analytic tradition also chipped away at many of the assumptions underlying Descartes' view.
And you mentioned phenomenology.
Right, particularly in continental philosophy, there was this theological turn in phenomenology, trying to find the sacred not in some separate supernatural realm, but within the texture of our lived experience itself.
That's interesting, finding the transcendent within experience.
And remarkably, this philosophical searching was happening alongside the revolution in physics.
Quantum mechanics, relativity.
Yeah. These theories radically challenged the old classical view of an objective, clockwork universe made of little billiard balls. They pointed towards a much stranger reality.
How so?
Well, objective reality itself became fuzzy. Substance ontology, the idea that the world is made of fundamental stuff, gave way to a more relational ontology, where things exist and get their properties through their interactions. Think of space-time perhaps emerging from quantum entanglement relationships, seem more fundamental than things.
So physics itself started undermining the simple materialism that came out of the earlier scientific revolution.
In a profound way, it really challenges reductionism, the idea you can understand everything just by breaking it down into the smallest parts. Emergent becomes crucial, and it opens the door again for that recovery of the vertical we talked about.
The idea that our being isn't just horizontal, historical.
Exactly. That we might participate in reality in deeper ontological ways.
So this is the context for Vervaeke's transcendent naturalism.
Yes. It's his attempt to formulate a stance that goes beyond physicalism, but without resorting to traditional supernaturalism. It embraces a multi-leveled reality emergence happening upwards, from simplicity to complexity, but also maybe emanation downwards, like foundational principles shaping lower levels. Very Neoplatonic echoes there.
And epistemologically, how do we know this?
He argues ontology shouldn't just come from science. It should also come from reflecting on what science presupposes, things like the universe being intelligible in the first place. Why should reality be understandable?
That's a good question.
And this leads to a different way of knowing a participatory epistemology. It's not just about our minds representing an external world. It's about engaging with, participating in different levels of reality, different levels of self.
Which could allow for those experiences of strong transcendence, maybe even non-duality.
That's the idea. A sense of deep connection, oneness, that isn't just a subjective feeling, but reflects a deeper reality we can participate in.
And this connects back to Schellenberg's idea about spiritual maturity.
Right. Vervaeke picks up on Schellenberg's suggestion that maybe humanity is, in a sense, spiritually immature, and that orienting towards strong transcendence via a thin description is optimal for growth. Not necessarily a specific religion, but an openness to that transformative potential.
So let's clarify the terms. We have theism, a thick description, specific beliefs about God or gods.
Yes, a detailed map of transcendence.
Then atheism, a rejection of strong transcendence altogether, often tied to materialism.
A thick description of non-transcendence, essentially.
And Vervaeke positions himself with non-theism.
As the thin, strong option. It affirms the possibility and importance of strong transcendence, but keeps the description thin, open, non-dogmatic. He sees this as potentially more conducive to genuine spiritual growth and what he terms the advent of the sacred.
The advent of the sacred, like a return or rediscovery.
Perhaps a potential reemergence of a sense of the sacred in our culture, but maybe in new forms. You could connect it back to how, after the Reformation, for some traditions, the sacred became more abstract, less tied to specific places or rituals.
And maybe we're seeing signs of this advent today, like the psychedelic renaissance.
That's one possible interpretation Vervaeke considers. The renewed interest in psychedelics, in shamanism, in various contemplative traditions. It could signal a deep cultural yearning to address the meaning crisis in ways that go beyond the purely material or political.
But there are criticisms too, right? Spiritual bypassing, new forms of materialism.
Absolutely. Vervaeke acknowledges those critiques. You can't just take a substance or adopt a practice and expect magic. It needs integration. Which brings us back to the ecology of practices.
Right, the need for a supportive framework.
Crucial. Without that rich ecology practices, ethics, community, a guiding worldview, you risk falling into those idiosyncratic rabbit hole metaphysics, creating your own stick description that might be disconnected or even harmful.
He points to the 60s psychedelic movement.
As an example where maybe the enthusiasm outpaced the development of adequate frameworks, leading to some challenges. He notes that psychedelics often seem most beneficial when integrated into a therapeutic or structured context, something sapiential, wisdom-oriented, and dialogical, involving conversation and shared understanding.
Makes sense. It's not just about the experience, but how you integrate it.
Exactly.
Now, Vervaeke has this model, the three-phase rocket: intelligence, rationality, wisdom. Can you sketch that out?
Sure. Briefly, intelligence is the base level, our fundamental ability to solve problems, adapt, anticipate, and crucially, to realize relevance, figuring out what matters in an ocean of information.
Okay, relevance realization, that sounds key.
It is, and rationality builds on that. It's about overcoming the self-deception that our own intelligence inevitably generates. We're good at fooling ourselves, so rationality is about correcting for that bias.
Getting closer to truth, overcoming biases.
Right. And then wisdom is the top stage. It's about coordinating all the different kinds of knowing, propositional, procedural, perspectival, participatory, to live well, to make good judgments, especially in complex situations where rules aren't enough.
Intelligence, rationality, wisdom, a hierarchy of cognitive capacities. And he thinks relevance realization, that base level, is special.
He argues it's likely non-computational.
No.
That you can't capture the essence of figuring out what's relevant using only formal rules or algorithms.
Why not?
Well, he gets into the weeds here, drawing on things like the limits of formal systems, shown by Gödel, the halting problem in computation, the sheer computational intractability of checking all possibilities. Basically, formal logic and computation struggle with the fluid, context-dependent nature of relevance. How do you formalize significance?
So our core ability to make sense of the world might not be reducible to computation.
That's his contention. It's a deep challenge to standard AI models.
Speaking of consciousness,
Yeah.
how does he approach that? The subjective experience, the what it's like?
He poses three big meta-questions. What is consciousness? Its nature. What does it do? Its function. And how are those two related? He also makes an interesting distinction about qualia, the subjective qualities of experience.
Like the redness of red.
Right, those are adjectival qualia. But he suggests maybe adverbial qualia are more fundamental.
Adverbial, like how we experience things.
Exactly, the howness.
Yeah.
He talks about things like here-ness, the feeling of being here, nowness, the sense of presence, togetherness, the way consciousness integrates experience, isness or realness, and intelligibility, the feeling that things make sense.
So the underlying structure or mode of awareness rather than just the specific content.
Precisely. And he points to certain non-dual or mystical states where the adjectival qualia, the specific sensory content, might fade or disappear, even conceptual thought might cease. But a fundamental awareness, these adverbial qualia, remains.
That's a fascinating angle. What does this imply for AI consciousness?
Well, based on his view of relevance realization being non-computational and consciousness being deeply tied to that, plus embodiment and genuine care, and organism's investment in its own persistence.
Yeah.
He's skeptical that current LLMs, for example, have anything like real consciousness. They lack that recursive relevance realization, the embodied agency, the caring.
They're sophisticated pattern matchers, but not truly conscious in his view.
That seems to be his position.
Yeah.
It brings us back to that Borges metaphor, the Library of Babel. Infinite information, but no inherent meaning.
Right, just endless combinations of letters.
And in a world potentially drowning in information, maybe generated by AI, Vervaeke suggests that meaning, rationality, wisdom, these aren't just optional extras, they're crucial. And maybe disciplines like theology, which have always grappled with the non-propositional, the ineffable, the meaning of existence,
Hmm.
maybe they become more relevant, not less.
Interesting. Theology as a guide in the age of AI.
Potentially.
Hmm.
He emphasizes that purely computational approaches struggle with qualitative development in cognition. Referencing philosophers like Fodor, he argues you often need to step outside a formal system to make real progress, a Gödelian point again.
And what about quantum mechanics and the brain? Some people try to link those directly.
Vervaeke seems cautious there. While acknowledging some intriguing phenomena where quantum effects might play a role, like maybe in our sense of smell, he doesn't see broad evidence yet for applying quantum mechanics directly to explain higher-level cognition. He emphasizes that our minds still seem largely governed by classical cognitive biases and processes.
So keep the quantum speculation in check for now.
Seems to be his advice, pending more evidence.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we've gone from this idea of a meaning crisis rooted in physicalism, explored Vervaeke's historical diagnosis, looked at his proposal for non-theism, strong transcendence, the need for practices,
And delved into his cognitive science framework, relevance, realization, rationality, wisdom, his take on consciousness, even AI. It's a really integrated picture he's building.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how crucial these philosophical and historical perspectives are for understanding where we are now and where we might be heading.
You can't really grasp the present challenges without understanding how we got here, what frameworks we're operating within, often unconsciously.
Which leaves us with a final thought, perhaps.
You.
If purely materialist or computational views really do have these deep limitations in accounting for meaning, consciousness, wisdom, what kinds of new frameworks, what kinds of practices might we actually need to cultivate for human flourishing, especially as the world gets even more complex and technologically saturated?
That's the big question, isn't it? What does genuine human flourishing look like in the 21st century and beyond, and how do we foster it? It really invites personal reflection on one's own search for meaning.
A question to keep exploring. Thanks for unpacking all of that.
My pleasure. It's fascinating territory.